Okay, so are you ready to get into it? Today we're going to really break down how a law gets made in the US Congress, but also how sometimes they just don't.
Yeah, it's definitely a process with a lot of moving parts, right? But once you get a handle on it all, it'll make a lot more sense why progress can sometimes feel like it's moving so slow.
Exactly. And we're going deep today with some interesting sources.
Yeah, for sure.
We've got excerpts from a political science textbook, which is kind of like our rule book, right?
Uh-huh.
And then to give us that insider perspective, we've got Kill Switch by Adam Gentleson.
Oh,
He
yeah.
was a Senate staffer, so he's seen it all firsthand.
Right, he's contrasting that more idealized view you get from a textbook.
Totally. So it's like getting two sides of the same coin.
Yeah, definitely.
So let's start with the basics, I guess.
Okay.
The House and the Senate both have a hand in making laws, but they each have their own style.
Yeah, for sure.
Right. So tell me about that.
Okay, well, the House of Representatives, it's got 435 members, so it's a lot more structured.
Right.
Things are really planned out,
Yeah.
strict rules, tons of activity. It's kind of like a beehive, honestly.
Wow. Yeah, I can see that. And then you've got the Senate, which is way smaller, right?
Much smaller. Yeah, just 100 members.
It's a lot more chill.
Yeah. Yeah, you could say that.
Yeah.
It's definitely more flexible, which allows for things like the filibuster, which Jentleson talks about a lot in his book.
We'll get into the filibuster, don't worry.
Mhm.
But I did want to touch on something our textbook mentioned about the House.
Okay.
This thing called the Committee of the Whole.
Oh, yeah.
It sounds kind of formal, right?
It does, but it's really a way for the House to relax a little bit.
Interesting.
Yeah, even non-voting delegates from U.S. territories can have a say.
Huh. So even in that structured environment, there's a need to be flexible.
Exactly.
It really speaks to the kind of dynamic nature of lawmaking, don't you think?
For sure.
So the next thing I wanted to talk about was committees,
Oh, yeah.
because our textbook really highlights how important they are.
They're like the engine rooms of Congress.
It's where the magic happens, huh?
Yeah, that's one way to put it. Bills are debated, amended, sometimes even shelved indefinitely.
Really?
Yeah, they call it pigeonholing.
Wow, I didn't know that.
Committees hold hearings, bring in experts to testify. It's where a lot of the real work gets done.
So you're telling me that getting on the right committee is super important for a member of Congress?
100%. There's a reason why our textbook uses the House Ways and Means Committee as an example.
Which is?
It's the one that handles taxes. So, yeah, it's super powerful.
It makes sense though, right?
No, for sure.
Taxes affect everyone.
Mm-hmm.
So having a say in that process is a big deal.
Absolutely.
I used to think committees were kind of boring, but now I realize they're where the rubber meets the road.
Yeah, and workhorses for sure.
So, okay, let's say a bill actually makes it through committee.
Right.
What's next?
Well, then it goes to the floor debate and voting process, which is where things can get really interesting.
Especially in the Senate, right?
Exactly. That's where the filibuster comes into play.
Oh, man. The filibuster, Jentleson does not paint a pretty picture of how that's evolved.
No, he does not. Basically, it lets a minority of senators delay a vote on a bill for as long as they want.
So they can basically hold everything up.
Pretty much, Jentleson actually calls it a kill switch that can totally paralyze the Senate.
And I think he argues it's gotten even easier to use over the years, right?
Definitely. And that's a big part of why nothing seems to get done in the Senate these days.
It's crazy how something that's supposed to encourage debate can be used like that.
Yeah, it really highlights how these rules can be manipulated.
We also can't talk about the filibuster without talking about its history.
Yeah.
I mean, it was used to block civil rights legislation for decades.
Yeah, and Jentleson makes the point that this just shows how the filibuster can be used to stop progress and even, perpetuate injustice.
It's a scary thought, honestly. So, okay, before we go too deep on the filibuster,
Yeah.
let's talk about another super important thing,
Which is
the
what?
budget.
Oh, yeah, the budget. Always a hot topic.
Yeah, and it affects everyone, so we need to understand it.
100%.
So our trusty textbook laid out the basics.
Okay.
We've got mandatory spending, which covers things like Social Security and Medicare.
Right. Those are the essentials.
And then there's discretionary spending, which is where things get a little more interesting.
That's where Congress gets to decide how to spend the money.
So that's where you see a difference in priorities.
Exactly. Conservatives want to spend less. Liberals want to spend more. It's a classic battle.
It's like dividing up a pie, but with way higher stakes.
Definitely. So how does it actually work?
Well, the president submits a budget, but Congress doesn't just say, okay.
Right.
They have their own committees to go over everything.
It's a back and forth.
Right, like a dance.
A very high-stakes dance.
This is true. Speaking of standoffs, though,
Yeah.
it's hard not to think about the filibuster here, too.
Oh, totally right.
Yeah.
It can mess with the whole budget process,
Exactly. And that can even lead to a government shutdown.
which is never good.
It's like everything in Congress is connected
It's all part of the same system.
like a giant puzzle.
Exactly. And you got to understand all the pieces to really get it.
Okay, so to recap, we've covered the House, the Senate committees, the filibuster, and the budget.
Wow, that's a lot.
Right. So I think we're starting to get a better understanding of how this whole thing works.
You've laid a good foundation, yeah.
But there's still so much more to talk about.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Like lobbyists, the media, how everyday people can actually make a difference.
Those are the big ones.
Exactly. We'll get into all that right after this quick break.
Sounds good.
No.
Yeah, it really is a high-stakes game, isn't it? Like, who gets to control the money?
Totally. And it's not like we're talking about monopoly money here.
Right. These decisions have huge consequences for all of us.
Exactly. So, like, where does all this money even come from?
Well, our textbook actually broke it down pretty well.
Okay.
The biggest chunk comes from individual income taxes.
So, like, our paychecks.
Basically, yeah. Then you've got social insurance taxes, which are also called payroll taxes, I think.
Right. Those are for things like Social Security.
Yeah, and Medicare and unemployment insurance.
Okay. And then there's corporate taxes, right?
Right, but those make up a smaller percentage than you might think.
Really?
Yeah. And then you've got tariffs, which are taxes on imported goods.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
And excise taxes.
Oh, yeah, those are the ones on things like gasoline and cigarettes.
It's a lot to keep track of.
It really is.
So once the government has all that money, the real fun begins, right?
That's when they have to decide how to spend it all.
Which brings us back to the whole battle over discretionary spending.
Where the real ideological differences come out.
Right. Like conservatives usually want less spending and liberals want more.
Exactly. It's like this age-old debate.
And it all comes down to priorities. Right?
For sure.
Yeah.
Like, do we put more money towards defense or education? Or what about infrastructure versus healthcare?
Those are tough choices.
They really are. And they have a huge impact on the entire country.
So it's a lot of pressure on Congress.
Oh, yeah, for sure. To try and make everyone happy with the budget.
And speaking of pressure, we can't forget about the national debt.
Oh, boy. Yeah, the national debt.
Our textbook definitely didn't shy away from that topic.
How could they?
Right? They made it clear that when the government spends more than it takes in, we end up with a deficit.
And those deficits add up over time to create the national debt.
That's what do we do about it?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? There are a lot of different opinions on that.
Like what?
Well, some people think we should cut spending. Others think we should raise taxes.
And some people probably think we need to do a little bit of both.
Probably. It's a really complex issue with no easy answers.
Especially with all the political gridlock.
Exactly. It makes it nearly impossible to get anything done.
Okay, so we've talked about how laws are made, the budget, the national debt.
It's a lot.
It is.
Yeah.
But before we wrap things up, I want to talk about something we mentioned earlier.
Okay.
The role of everyday citizens in all of this.
Right, because it's easy to feel powerless in all of this.
Totally. Like our voices don't matter.
But that's not true at all. Remember, this is a government for the people, by the people.
So we have a responsibility to be involved.
Exactly. We need to stay informed, contact our representatives, make our voices heard.
It's not enough to just vote every few years.
You have to be engaged.
And understanding how the system works is a big part of that.
That's what we're trying to do here today.
Right. We're peeling back the layers of Congress, showing you how it all works.
So you can be more informed and engaged.
Because at the end of the day, the future of our democracy depends on it.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
It's really amazing when you think about all the work that goes on behind the scenes in Congress.
Oh, yeah, for sure. It's not just about the members of Congress themselves.
Right. Like our textbook mentioned congressional staffers and how they do a ton of research and writing and like basically make sure things actually happen.
Yeah, they're the ones keeping the wheels turning behind the curtain.
Totally. And it's not just them either.
Oh, yeah, you've got lobbyists, think tanks, advocacy groups.
It's like a whole ecosystem.
Exactly. And they're all trying to influence what the government does.
Which is why it's so important for people to realize that being engaged isn't just about voting.
Right? You have to do more than that.
Yeah, like stay informed, contact your representatives, speak up about the things you care about.
Be an active participant.
Exactly. You can't just sit back and complain.
You have to be part of the solution.
You know, we started this whole deep dive talking about gridlock and frustration.
Yeah.
And while that's definitely real, I'm actually feeling kind of hopeful now.
Really? How so?
Well, because even though it's messy,
Uh-huh.
we have this system where people can actually make a difference.
It's a way to channel the will of the people, right?
Exactly. It's not perfect, but it's ours. you know,
And that's why it's so important to understand it.
so we can make it better.
Exactly.
And that's what I love about these deep dives.
That's sad.
We take these really complicated topics and try to break them down so that everyone can understand.
And hopefully feel empowered to get involved.
Exactly. Because knowledge is power.
Couldn't agree more.
So if you're feeling like you want to learn more, we've got a bunch of resources linked in the show notes.
Yeah, definitely check those out.
You can find everything from how to contact your representatives to like in-depth explanations of how laws are made.
It's all there.
Don't be afraid to dive in and get involved.
That's what we want you to do.
Your voice matters. Until next time, happy deep diving.